My name is Amina Al-Hassan, and I am 32 years old as I speak these words into the quiet, because silence has followed me longer than courage ever did. I was born the only daughter of Sheikh Ibrahim Al-Hassan, a man whose name carried weight in our city, whose voice opened mosques, settled disputes, and silenced women like me before we learned how to speak. From the outside, my life looked like honor wrapped in modesty. People lowered their eyes when we passed. They praised my hijab, my obedience, my softness. They said I was blessed. But inside our home, faith was not warmth, it was discipline. Love was conditional. God was always watching, always counting, always disappointed. From the time I could walk, I learned how to bow before I learned how to dream. I memorized surahs before I understood what mercy felt like. I learned that questions were dangerous and doubt was shame. My mother told me often, "Your father's reputation is your soul," so I learned to disappear inside myself to protect it. At night, when the house was quiet and the call to prayer had faded into memory, I would lie awake and whisper du'as into the dark, asking Allah why my chest felt so empty if I was doing everything right. No answer ever came. Only more rules, more fear, more reminders that a good daughter is a silent one. As I grew older, the praise increased, but so did the pressure. I was watched carefully, corrected publicly, and measured constantly against the men I could never be. I was never allowed to forget that my body carried shame by default and honor only through obedience. Still, I tried. I fasted harder. I prayed longer. I cried quietly so no one would accuse me of weakness. Yet something in me kept asking a question I was afraid to name. If God is merciful, why did I feel so unloved? I carried that question like a wound, hidden beneath layers of fabric and expectation. Even now, telling you this puts me at risk, because stories like mine are not meant to be told. They are meant to be buried. But if you are listening right now, questioning quietly like I once did, then maybe my voice reaching you is not an accident. If this testimony helps even one person feel less alone, then I ask you gently to stay with me, to support this channel, to share these stories so they cannot be erased. I am not asking for attention. I am asking for truth to survive. There were moments, small and almost invisible, when my heart ached for something I could not name, something softer than law, something that did not feel like fear. I did not know then that hunger was spiritual. I only knew that obedience was costing me pieces of myself, and that one day it would demand more than silence. One day it would demand my life. And when that day came, I would learn that the honor they gave me was never meant to save me at all. I remember my childhood as a series of rehearsals for perfection, every movement monitored, every emotion corrected before it could fully form. When guests visited, I poured tea with lowered eyes, while men discussed God as if he belonged to them alone. My father's sermons spoke of compassion, yet at home, his silence was sharper than any shout. When I made mistakes, they were framed as sins that stained the family, and repentance meant compliance, not healing. I learned early that being seen was dangerous, so I perfected invisibility. Even my laughter felt like a crime. As a young woman, proposals were discussed around me as if I were not present. My future negotiated like a treaty. My consent assumed because obedience had already been trained into my bones. I watched other girls dream aloud and wondered why my dreams dissolved the moment I tried to hold them. There was a loneliness that prayer never touched, a coldness fasting never warmed. I began to suspect that faith without love becomes a prison, but I pushed that thought away, terrified of where it might lead. I told myself endurance was holiness. I told myself suffering was proof. Yet every night, as I laid my head on the floor to pray, I felt smaller, not closer to God, shrinking instead of growing. Looking back now, I see the warning signs I ignored, the quiet despair that settled in my chest like dust. I did not know then that my obedience was leading me toward a grave dug by those who claimed to love me. I only knew that something inside me was slowly dying, and no one seemed to notice. That is why I am speaking now, before the rest of this story steals my breath. I want you to understand who I was before everything shattered, before faith turned into fear, and family became my greatest danger. I was not rebellious. I was not immoral. I was a daughter, trying to be good, trying to be worthy, trying to survive. And that obedience, the very thing they praised me for, would soon place me beneath the earth, wondering if God could hear me there. This is where my story truly begins, at the edge of devotion, fear, and a truth I never expected. When faith became fear, it did not arrive all at once. It crept into my life quietly, disguised as devotion. I began noticing things I was never meant to notice. Verses about mercy were spoken loudly in the mosque, yet punishment was practiced softly at home, hidden behind closed doors. I watched my mother flinch when my father corrected her Quran recitation, his voice calm but cutting. I watched women sob in the imam's office, blamed for the violence done to them, told to endure for Allah. Each time I witnessed these moments, something inside me cracked, just a little. I told myself this was my test, that doubt was a whisper from Shaitan, but the whisper sounded more like my own heart begging to be heard. I prayed harder, longer, pressing my forehead into the mat until my skin burned, asking Allah to remove the confusion. Silence answered me every time. The first time fear replaced faith completely was during a Friday sermon my father delivered. He spoke about apostasy, about betrayal, about how leaving Islam was worse than death. His words were sharp, uncompromising. I felt them land on my chest like stones. I looked around the mosque and saw men nodding, agreement etched into their faces. In that moment, I realized love in our faith had limits, and those limits were enforced with fear. That realization haunted me. I could not sleep. I began replaying every sermon, every verse, every warning I had memorized, wondering why truth needed threats to survive. The breaking point came when my cousin Samira was dragged before the community for refusing a marriage arranged for her. She stood shaking, her voice barely audible, as elders lectured her about obedience and shame. My father did not defend her. He lowered his gaze and let them strip her dignity piece by piece. I remember her eyes meeting mine, silently asking for help I could not give. That night, Samira disappeared from our lives. We were told she had been sent away to be corrected. No one asked where. No one prayed for her. Something in me shattered beyond repair. If this was righteousness, why did it feel so cruel? I began asking forbidden questions inside my mind. Why was fear a tool of faith? Why did women carry the weight of honor while men carried authority? Why did mercy feel theoretical, but punishment felt real? I did not dare speak these questions aloud. Instead, I carried them into the night, hiding beneath my blanket with my phone dimmed to its lowest light, searching phrases I was ashamed to type. My hands trembled as I scrolled, terrified that Allah would strike me for curiosity alone. That fear kept me loyal longer than belief ever did. One night, exhausted from crying, I stumbled across a discussion comparing Islamic law to the words of Jesus. I did not intend to read it. I only meant to glance, to confirm my faith, to reassure myself. But one sentence stopped me completely. "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." I stared at the words as if they were breathing. Rest, not discipline, not endurance. Rest. My chest tightened and tears blurred the screen. No verse I had ever memorized spoke to my exhaustion like that single line. I closed the page immediately, panic flooding me, my heart racing as if I had committed a crime. For days, that sentence haunted me. It echoed in my thoughts during prayer, during chores, during sermons. I tried to drown it out with Quran recitation, but it only grew louder. It was gentle, not demanding. It did not threaten me. It invited me. That frightened me more than any warning ever had. I began to realize that fear had kept me obedient, but it had never healed me. Faith that survives only through terror is not faith, it is captivity. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, of every glance, every comment. I felt watched, even in my thoughts. The God I had been taught to love now felt like a warden. And yet, somewhere deep inside, that single sentence from Jesus continued to pulse like a heartbeat, steady and alive. I did not understand it. I did not want to understand it, but I could not forget it. That was the moment my world shifted, quietly but irrevocably. Faith had become fear, and fear had opened a door I did not know how to close. And behind that door was a name I was not yet brave enough to speak aloud. I sensed that something was unraveling inside me, something I could not explain without condemning myself. Every warning I had learned suddenly felt fragile, like glass held together by fear alone. I began to understand that if truth is true, it does not need chains. That thought terrified me, because it meant my questions were no longer sinful curiosities, they were invitations. And once an invitation is heard, it cannot be unheard. My heart trembled, knowing obedience could no longer silence this awakening within. The night Jesus came looking for me was not holy in the way I had been taught to recognize holiness. There was no thunder, no angelic choir, no fear. It began with exhaustion. I had cried myself to sleep after another day of pretending, my face still wet with tears, my heart heavy with questions I could not silence. I remember whispering into the darkness, not a proper prayer, not Arabic, just words spilling out of me like blood. I said I was tired of being afraid. I said I did not want to die inside anymore. I said if God was real, He had to meet me where I was, because I could not climb any higher. That was when sleep took me, deep and sudden, and I found myself standing in a place that felt more real than my own room. There was light, but it did not hurt my eyes. It felt alive, like warmth with intention. I felt seen before I saw anyone. Then I heard my name, not shouted, not commanded, spoken gently, as if it had always belonged to love. Amina. I turned, and there he was. I cannot fully describe his face without losing something true, but I knew instantly it was Jesus. Not because of pictures or stories, but because my soul recognized him the way a child recognizes its mother's voice. His eyes held authority without threat, sorrow without distance, and love without condition. He did not lecture me. He did not accuse me. He simply looked at me, and in that gaze, every burden I carried felt exposed and lifted at the same time. I tried to speak, but my throat closed. I expected judgment. Instead, he stepped closer. When he spoke again, he said, "You are not forgotten." Those words broke something open inside me. I fell to my knees, not out of fear, but because my strength left me. I felt years of shame pour out of my chest like poison being drained. I cried without restraint, without embarrassment, without the need to be quiet. Jesus knelt beside me, and though he did not touch me, I felt held. The peace that flooded me was overwhelming, almost frightening in its gentleness. I understood nothing about theology, nothing about doctrine. I only knew I was safe. I woke up gasping, my heart racing, my pillow soaked with tears. For a moment, I panicked, convinced I had committed shirk, that I had betrayed everything I was taught. But the peace remained. It wrapped around me like a blanket, steady and unmovable. I sat up in the dark, my hands shaking, replaying the dream over and over. His voice echoed in my mind, calm and certain. "You are not forgotten." I pressed my hand to my chest, half expecting the feeling to vanish, but it stayed. That terrified me. If this was deception, why did it heal me? If this was evil, why did it feel like truth? I spent the rest of the night awake, torn between fear and longing. At dawn, when my family rose for prayer, I moved like a ghost, repeating words that suddenly felt hollow. My heart was elsewhere. That afternoon, locked in the bathroom with the shower running to hide the sound, I opened my phone and searched for a Bible. My fingers hesitated over the screen. One download could change everything. I told myself I was only curious. I told myself I would delete it. But when the app opened and I read the words of Jesus for the first time, something inside me wept with recognition. I am the way, the truth, and the life. The words did not argue. They invited. I read in secret for days, hiding the app behind folders, deleting history, living in constant fear of discovery. Every verse felt like water on a wound I had carried for years. I felt alive in a way I never had before, and that frightened me more than punishment. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that if my family found out, I would lose them. I would lose my home. I might lose my life. But I also knew I had encountered something I could not deny. Jesus had not appeared to debate me. He came to find me. And once you are found, you cannot pretend you were never lost. The realization settled slowly, like dusk, unavoidable and heavy. I began guarding my thoughts as carefully as my actions, afraid even my silence would betray me. Each night, I reread the same passages, memorizing them the way I once memorized surahs, but this time my heart was awake. I whispered Jesus' name like a secret breath, tasting both terror and hope. I knew obedience had shifted, that my loyalty no longer belonged to fear. The peace I carried became both my refuge and my sentence. Somewhere deep inside, I understood this was the beginning, not the end. And beginnings are dangerous when truth demands everything. I was changing, and there would be no way back. Something in me began to slip out of alignment once Jesus entered my inner world, like a thread pulled loose that could no longer be hidden. I still prayed, still covered my hair, still answered my Father with yes and silence, but my obedience had lost its rhythm. My family noticed before I did. My mother watched me closely, her eyes lingering too long on my face, as if searching for something unfamiliar. My father began asking questions that were not really questions. Why are you quieter? Why do you hesitate? Why do you look afraid when you pray? Each word tightened around my throat. I felt like a house with a secret fire burning behind the walls, smoke leaking through the cracks no matter how carefully I sealed them. The peace I carried from Jesus did not make me reckless. It made me honest, and honesty was dangerous. During prayer, my lips moved, but my heart whispered his name instead. I felt guilt and relief tangled together, fear fighting peace. The community began to close in subtly. An aunt commented that I no longer smiled the way a good Muslim woman should. A neighbor suggested more Quran classes. My father arranged for me to speak with an imam known for correcting wayward youth. I sat across from him, hands folded, listening as he warned me about doubt, about hell, about the fate of apostates. His words were sharp, rehearsed, heavy with threat. I nodded as I had been trained, but inside, I felt something new rise up, not rebellion, but clarity. If truth needs fear to survive, it is already broken. That thought terrified me. At home, the pressure intensified. My phone was checked. My time was monitored. My mother cried quietly at night, telling me I was killing my father with worry. Emotional blackmail wrapped itself around me like rope. Do you want to destroy this family? Do you want to be the reason we are shamed? I loved them. That was the cruelest part. I loved them deeply, and that love was being used as a weapon. Every night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, bargaining with God. I told Jesus I could not lose my parents. I told him I was not strong enough to be alone. I begged him to let me keep both truth and safety. Silence answered me, but not the empty silence I knew before. This silence felt like waiting, like a question being handed back to me. One evening, my father confronted me directly. He asked if I believed everything Islam taught. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I wanted to lie. I wanted to survive. But the image of Jesus calling my name rose in my mind, gentle and unwavering. I felt a line drawn inside me, and I knew stepping back would cost me more than stepping forward. I answered carefully, saying I was seeking God sincerely. His face hardened. Sincerity without obedience is rebellion, he said. That night, I realized there would be no middle ground. Following Jesus was not a quiet preference. It was a declaration, even in silence. The fear that followed was physical. My hands shook, my stomach knotted. Every sound startled me. I began hiding small pieces of paper with Bible verses written by hand, memorizing them before burning them. One verse stayed with me constantly. Perfect love casts out fear. I did not feel fearless. I felt terrified, but I felt loved, and that love was slowly teaching me how to stand. The final moment came in the dark, alone in my room, my family asleep. I knelt on the floor, my forehead pressed to the carpet, my body trembling. I knew what choosing Jesus could cost me. I knew the stories. I knew the punishments. My voice barely worked as I whispered into the quiet, not loudly, not bravely, just truthfully. Jesus, even if they kill me, I choose you. The words felt heavier than anything I had ever spoken. They settled into me like a seal. I did not feel heroic. I felt small and exposed. But something shifted. The decision did not remove the danger. It clarified it. I rose from the floor knowing there was no turning back, knowing that love had demanded my life, not in death, but in surrender. And surrender, I was about to learn, is never safe in a world ruled by fear. The day everything broke open did not begin with violence, but with silence so thick it felt deliberate. My father did not look at me during breakfast. My mother's hands shook as she poured tea. No one spoke my name. I knew then that the secret fire had been discovered, though no one had said the words yet. Later that afternoon, my phone was taken from me. My room was searched. I stood in the doorway as my father held the Bible pages I had written by hand, my careful Arabic letters now evidence against me. He did not shout. That frightened me more than anger ever could. He asked one question, slowly, clearly, so there would be no misunderstanding. Have you left Islam? Time stretched painfully. I felt my body screaming for me to lie, to survive, to take it back. But the peace I had known with Jesus stood quietly inside me, steady and present. I answered with my head bowed, my voice barely above a breath. I said, I believe in Jesus. The room collapsed into chaos. My mother cried out as if someone had died. My father's face twisted into something I had never seen before, a mixture of grief and fury, apostate, traitor, shame. The words blurred together. Neighbors were called. Men arrived. Decisions were made without me. I was no longer a daughter. I was a problem to be solved. They said they were protecting honor. They said they were obeying God. My wrists were bound. I did not resist. I was numb, floating somewhere above my body, watching obedience reach its final demand. We drove far from the city, the road empty, the sky darkening. No one spoke to me. I prayed silently, not in Arabic, not with rehearsed words, but with my heart exposed. Jesus, stay with me. The car stopped where the earth was soft and the night swallowed sound. I was pulled out, my feet slipping on dirt. When I understood what they were about to do, my knees buckled. My mother would not meet my eyes. My father recited verses, his voice steady, convincing himself as much as anyone else. They lowered me into the ground, the cold earth pressing against my legs. I screamed then, not in defiance, but in terror. My voice cracked as soil hit my chest, my shoulders, my face. Darkness closed in. The weight was unbearable. I gasped, earth filling my mouth, my nose. Panic clawed through me. I thought of every warning I had ever heard about leaving Islam, every sermon, every threat, and realized they were not metaphors. They were instructions. In that suffocating darkness, I felt death pressing close. My lungs burned, my body convulsed. And in that moment, stripped of fear, stripped of identity, stripped of everything, I surrendered fully. Jesus, receive me. I do not regret you. Peace washed over me, not removing the pain, but dissolving the terror. I was no longer alone in the dark. I felt his presence, closer than breath, gentler than air. My thoughts slowed. My body weakened. I remember thinking that if this was death, then it was not empty. My consciousness began to fade, the world narrowing to warmth and light somewhere beyond the soil. I did not know if I would wake again. I did not know if anyone would find me. I only knew that what they buried was no longer afraid. The last thing I remember was whispering his name with what little breath I had left, trusting it into the dark as my vision went black. I woke to pain before I woke to light, sharp and immediate, slicing through the fog like a reminder that I was still in my body. My chest burned as I tried to breathe, coughing dirt and blood, my throat raw and torn. Hands were on me, voices shouting, unfamiliar, panicked. I could not understand the words, only the urgency. Someone pulled me upward, air rushing into my lungs, so violently I thought they would tear apart. I screamed, not from fear, but from shock, my body waking up too fast for my mind to follow. I remember the night sky spinning above me, stars blurred by tears, and then everything dissolved again into darkness. When I woke the second time, the light was white and steady, humming softly. I smelled disinfectant and heard machines breathing beside me. For a moment, I wondered if I was dead, if this was some strange afterlife. Then pain flared again, grounding me. A woman leaned over me, her eyes wide with disbelief. She said I was found by shepherds who heard something moving beneath the soil. She said I was a miracle. I closed my eyes and wept silently, because I knew it was mercy. My body was broken. Bruises covered my skin. My ribs screamed with every breath. My voice was barely a whisper. But inside, I was alive in a way I had never been before. In the days that followed, drifting in and out of sleep, memories came and went like waves. I remembered the weight of the earth, then the peace beneath it. I remembered fear ruling my life, then love meeting me at the edge of death. The irony was not lost on me. The faith that promised life had tried to erase me. Jesus met me where they left me to die and stayed. When the police came, questions followed. I answered carefully, vaguely. Names were not spoken. I knew the consequences of truth spoken too soon. Protection came quietly. Arrangements made by people I had never met. Believers whose faces I would not see again. I was moved before my family could find me. I did not ask where they were. I did not ask if they were looking. In my heart, I already knew I could never go back. Recovery was slow and lonely. At night, when pain woke me, fear tried to return, whispering that I was alone, that I had lost everything. But every time panic rose, peace answered it, steady and present. I began to pray again, softly, honestly. I spoke to Jesus like he was near, because he was. I did not ask him to fix my body quickly. I asked him to keep my heart from hardening. Forgiveness came unexpectedly, not as emotion, but as decision. I chose not to hate them. I chose not to let bitterness become my new prison. I said their names before God and released them, even though my hands still shook when I thought of them. Healing is not dramatic. It is quiet, repetitive, painful. I learned how to walk again without flinching. I learned how to sleep without jolting awake. I learned how to breathe without panic. Scripture became my anchor. I clung to words about light, overcoming darkness, about love being stronger than death. Each verse felt earned, tested by soil and breath. One evening, as I watched the sun sink beyond the hospital window, it settled fully into my heart that my old life was gone. There would be no reconciliation, no safe return, no pretending. Grief washed over me, heavy and deep. I mourned my parents while they still lived. I mourned the daughter I had been trained to be. Jesus did not rush that grief. He sat with me in it. And in that stillness, I realized something profound. They tried to end my story, but they only ended my fear. I was alive by mercy, sustained by grace, and walking into a future I never chose but was being given. I left the hospital under another name, another identity, stepping into uncertainty with a quiet resolve. I did not know where I would go, only that I could never return, and for the first time, exile felt like freedom. Exile does not arrive with clarity. It arrives with hunger, with unfamiliar ceilings, with the sound of your own breathing too loud in rooms that are not yours. I moved through the world like a shadow, carrying a small bag and a body that still flinched at sudden noises. Every face felt like a threat. Every knock made my heart race. I had no home, no family, no past I could safely explain. I learned quickly how invisible I had become, how easily a person can disappear when their name is stripped away. Shame followed me everywhere, not the shame my family taught me, but a quieter one, the shame of survival. I wondered why I lived when others like me did not. I wondered if I deserved the mercy I had been given. Nights were the hardest. Sleep brought flashes of darkness and soil, my body waking before my mind could remind it that I was safe. I would sit on the floor, hugging my knees, whispering Jesus' name until my breathing slowed. I did not feel strong. I felt fragile and exposed, like glass held together by prayer. It was during one of those nights, searching for comfort on a borrowed phone, that I found an online church. I did not plan to stay. I only wanted to listen, to hear a voice that spoke of God without anger. I watched from the shadows, camera off, volume low, tears streaming as strangers spoke about grace like it was real. No one demanded proof. No one threatened me. They spoke of Jesus, as if he was close, as if he cared about wounds like mine. Slowly, I began to believe I was not alone. Messages came quietly, encouragement without pressure. I learned there were others like me, hidden believers, scattered across countries, surviving quietly. That knowledge held me together. Scripture became my daily bread. I read it the way a starving person eats, desperately, slowly, afraid it might run out. Verses about adoption, about being chosen, about God placing the lonely in families, began to reshape my identity. I was no longer just the daughter who failed. I was learning to see myself as a child of God. Healing did not erase my past. It taught me how to carry it without being crushed. I learned that grace does not excuse pain. It redeems it. I learned that love does not demand silence. It invites truth. There were days I missed my mother so intensely, it felt like grief would split me open. There were days anger surged unexpectedly, hot and consuming. I brought all of it to Jesus, unfiltered, unashamed. He did not correct me. He did not rush me. He stayed. Over time, the nightmares softened. My body learned new patterns. I laughed once, unexpectedly, and froze, surprised by the sound. It felt like betrayal at first, then like resurrection. Eventually, the question I had been avoiding rose to the surface. Would I speak? Silence had kept me alive, but it also kept others in chains. I knew the risk. I knew what exposure could bring. Yet I also knew what silence had cost me. I prayed for courage, not to be fearless, but to be obedient. The decision formed slowly, painfully, like bone knitting back together. I would tell my story, not to attack, not to accuse, but to testify. I would speak of what fear produced and what love healed. The night before I shared publicly for the first time, I barely slept. My hands shook as I prepared my words, aware that once spoken, they could not be taken back. I felt small again, like the girl who once whispered prayers into darkness, but I was not alone anymore. I was no longer hiding for survival alone. I was standing so others might breathe. As I looked at the camera, heart pounding, I understood that this was not the end of my exile. It was the beginning of my calling. And whatever came next, I would not walk it alone. When I finally spoke, my voice did not sound like courage. It sounded like trembling honesty. I sat in front of a camera with my face partially shadowed, my name withheld, my hands folded tightly in my lap to keep them from shaking. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would drown out my words. I knew that somewhere, someone might recognize my voice, my phrasing, my story. Fear pressed against my ribs, urging me to stay silent, reminding me of the earth, the darkness, the weight. But another voice rose stronger, quieter, steady. It reminded me why I was still breathing. I began slowly, telling the truth the way it had come to me, piece by piece. I did not insult Islam. I did not curse my family. I simply described the fruit. I spoke of fear disguised as faith, of obedience demanded without love, of questions punished instead of answered. I spoke of the night Jesus found me, of a peace I could not manufacture, of a love that met me when everyone else withdrew. As the words left my mouth, something inside me loosened. It felt like opening a window in a room that had been sealed for years. I expected condemnation. Instead, messages began to appear quietly. I am like you. I thought I was alone. I am afraid too. Each message felt like a hand reaching out of the dark. Still, the fear did not vanish. There were days afterward when I jumped at unfamiliar sounds, when anonymous threats arrived, when my body remembered danger before my mind could reason it away. I wrestled with guilt, wondering if I had done more harm than good. One night, overwhelmed, I fell to my knees and asked Jesus why obedience still felt costly. The answer did not come as words, but as remembrance. He had never promised safety. He promised presence. That truth steadied me. I continued speaking, carefully, prayerfully, never naming names, never seeking revenge. I told people what nearly destroyed me and what saved me. I shared scripture not as weapons, but as lifelines, verses that carried me when my own strength failed. I spoke of forgiveness as a choice, not a feeling, of love that does not demand silence. With each testimony, fear loosened its grip. I was no longer speaking to survive. I was speaking to serve. The climax was not dramatic. There was no confrontation, no shouting match, no final showdown with my past. The battle was internal, quiet, fought in moments when fear whispered retreat and obedience whispered remain. Each time I chose to speak truth gently, fear lost territory. I realized I did not need to destroy my former faith to honor my new one. Truth exposes itself simply by being lived. The more I focused on Jesus, the less power my past held over me. One evening, after sharing my story yet again, I sat alone and felt something unfamiliar settle over me. Freedom, not loud, not triumphant, but deep and steady. I wept then, not from pain, but release. I understood that my voice no longer belonged to fear. It belonged to love. I had done the thing I once thought impossible. I had spoken and survived. And more than that, others had breathed because I did. The soil that once silenced me no longer defined me. The threats no longer owned me. My story was no longer a weapon in someone else's hands. It was a testimony in God's. As I closed my eyes that night, I thanked Jesus not for removing danger, but for removing my chains. I knew there would still be consequences, still risk, still moments of doubt. But I also knew this. Silence had nearly killed me. Truth had set me free. And whatever came next, I would not return to the grave they prepared for me. I had chosen life, and life had chosen me. What they buried did not die, and I know that now with a certainty that reaches deeper than memory or pain. I live quietly, not because I am afraid, but because peace does not need noise to exist. My life is smaller than it once was in the eyes of the world, but it is fuller than I ever imagined it could be. I wake each morning without the familiar weight of dread pressing on my chest. I breathe without rehearsing fear. I speak to God without measuring my words. Jesus did not give me a new family to replace the one I lost. He gave me a new way to belong. There are people who call me sister now, people who pray my name without knowing my past, people who love me without conditions tied to obedience or shame. I still grieve my parents. I still ache for my mother's voice, for the childhood that could have been gentle. Forgiveness did not erase that grief. It gave it somewhere to rest. I no longer carry hatred like a second spine. I have learned that forgiveness is not reconciliation, and peace does not require access. Jesus taught me how to close doors without hardening my heart. There are days the memories return uninvited, when a smell of damp earth or a sudden pressure on my chest pulls me back into the dark. But fear no longer owns those moments. I speak His name, and light follows. Slowly, patiently. He has rebuilt me from the inside out. I am not who I was before, and I am not ashamed of that. Faith did not make me weaker. It made me honest. It did not remove suffering, it gave it meaning. If you are listening to this and you are questioning quietly, afraid of what truth might cost you, I want you to hear me clearly. I understand that fear. I lived inside it. I know the weight of family expectations, the terror of losing everything you know, the loneliness of doubt whispered into darkness. I am not here to tell you that the road is easy. It is not. I am here to tell you that love is worth it. Jesus did not come to make me Western or rebellious or immoral. He came to make me alive. He met me in the place where obedience ended and surrender began. He did not demand that I earn his presence. He offered it freely. If you are searching, if you are tired, if you feel unseen, I invite you, gently, to ask him to meet you where you are. Not with rehearsed words, not with fear, just with honesty. I did not lose everything when I chose him. I lost the cage that was slowly killing me. What they buried was my silence, my fear, my obedience to death. What rose was a woman who knows she is loved. I do not share this story to provoke anger or to shame anyone. I share it because truth deserves a voice, and because somewhere, someone is listening with their heart pounding the way mine once did. If that is you, you are not alone. You are not crazy. You are not beyond grace. My life is proof that even when the world decides you are disposable, God does not agree. Even when hands meant to protect you become weapons, His remain open. I do not know what tomorrow holds. I do not know what price my obedience may still demand. But I know this. I will never return to the grave dug for me by fear. I belong to Jesus now, and in Him I have found peace that survives the dark. If you need hope tonight, let this be it. What they bury does not die when God calls it by name.